Now that your reference samples have been approved, everybody's happy, you've got, let's say you're launching a collection of 8 styles, and you have 8 samples, 8 patterns, everything is great. The final deliverable in the apparel development process, once everything is said and done and approved, is what's called a tech pack. A tech pack is short for technical package. And a proper tech pack serves as the official instructional manual on how to make this garment, such that if you were to take your tech pack and your sample and give it to any factory in the world, they should be able to exactly know how to make this garment. In your tech pack, you're going to have your sewing instructions, stitching instructions, you're going to have your size specs, you're going to have your fabric yardage yields, you're going to have your bill of materials. So there's a lot of information and data that goes into a tech pack. Oftentimes, someone will come to me and say, well, we want to launch a collection and we already have our tech packs. So in my estimation, that means, oh, great, you have your patterns and everything as well. Well, no, we don't. We have the designs. Well, then you don't have a tech pack. What you have is a really good design. A proper tech pack can only be made when the entire development process is completed and approved. Again, in the tech pack, you're going to have your sewing and stitching instructions. What machines did they use? Did they use overlock stitch, cover stitch, single needle, flat lock stitch? What machinery was involved in the making of this garment? It needs to be identified. Were there any special sewing instructions that the future sewers may need to know? What fabric did they use? How much fabric is needed per garment? Again, we're going to get into that in just a second on the sourcing side of this conversation. What are all the ingredients? Well, this particular jacket has two zippers. It's got lining. It's got pockets. It's got thin leatherette. All the ingredients need to be called out and detailed in the tech pack. So again, the tech pack is only achieved when the entire development process is completed and approved. In your tech pack, and this gets really important for production, you will have what are called your fabric yields. The fabric yield says, in the software that you use, or whoever your pattern maker is, in that software, it will be able to tell how much yardage went into making this particular garment. If your garment is a one fabric garment, it'll say, well, we needed about 3/4 of a yard of fabric, okay? If your garment requires 2 or 3 different types of fabric, let's say it's a sports coat and it's got lining, it's got the self outer fabric, and let's say it's got some embellishments around the pockets, like a leatherette or some sort of PVC or whatever. The software, your pattern maker, should be able to tell you specifically how much yardage is needed per garment, per fabric. Now, in the tech pack, when you have your yardages, you can now multiply those yardages by the amount of pieces you want to make. So let's keep it simple. Let's say your fabric requires 1 yard of modal. Okay, that's in the tech pack. It says this is a fabric, we're making a simple summer dress or whatever we're making, it requires a modal fabric and it requires 1 yard to make 1 item. Now if you're going to make 500 garments, you're going to want at least 500 yards. Now, we're going to get into all the details of how much specifically. So 500 yards of modal goes into making 500 pieces. Well, that's not 100% true because, again, remember, there's always going to be fabric waste. When you lay down the fabric parts and pieces, it's not perfect geometry. There's always going to be a triangle between the two fabric, or something between the two pattern pieces. It might be an octagon, it might be a triangle, but there's going to be parts and spaces in between that's going to be considered fabric waste. I always add about 10% to the total for waste. So if you're making 500 pieces of something, and that something requires 1 yard of fabric, I would get 500 yards plus add another 10%. What's 10% of 500? 50, right? So 550 yards of fabric generally is what is going to be required to go into production. When you work with the production house, understand we're going to talk about production next. What are the MOQs? We'll define what an MOQ is because you have to meet, it's a minimum order quantity. You have to meet a minimum number of pieces for most factories to be able to work with you. If you can meet their MOQs or exceed it, great. But whatever those numbers are, you have to get those numbers, multiply it by your fabric yield at 10%. That's how much fabric you're going to need for that one garment. Okay, let's review that. Whatever your garment is, whatever the yardage fabric yield is in the tech pack, you need to multiply that by the number of pieces you want to make, add 10%, and that's how much you're going to need for that particular garment. You can only achieve that by having a proper tech pack with all this data and information. So in your tech pack, you have that. You have your sewing instructions we talked about, your stitching instructions, your fabric yields. You have your bill of materials. What are all the parts and pieces? Where can you get these parts and pieces? A really, really good tech pack. I'm talking a tech pack that'll blow most people's minds. Will not only have all the parts and pieces itemized, but where to get it. So who are the resources? Who are the fabric houses? Where did we get the zippers from? Where did we get the buttons from? Everything that garment will ever need to be made will be in the tech pack. And again, the tech pack is the official sewing instructions or the assembly instructions of the garment, such that anyone in the world will be able to take it, interpret it, and make that garment.